You've been here before. This exact moment, this familiar ache in your chest, this sense of watching yourself from outside your own body as you make the same choice again. You tell yourself this time will be different, but somewhere deep inside, a voice whispers that you already know how this story ends. The exhaustion isn't just physical anymore. It lives in your bones, in the spaces between your thoughts, in the morning hesitation before you open your eyes. You've become an expert at explaining it away. Bad timing, wrong circumstances, other people's issues. But in the quiet hours, when the world stops spinning and you're left alone with yourself, the truth sits heavy. You're the common denominator in every equation that equals pain. This isn't about weakness. This is about being chosen by patterns so ancient they predate your first memory, so sophisticated they've turned you into their perfect host. What you call your life is actually a master class in unconscious loyalty. Every relationship that drained you, every opportunity you let slip through your fingers, every moment you chose familiar suffering over unknown joy, these weren't failures of judgment. They were acts of profound obedience to an internal architecture built when you were too young to know you were under construction. Like a river that remembers its original path even after the landscape changes, your psyche flows toward what it knows. The mind doesn't seek happiness, it seeks the familiar. And if familiar meant navigating around someone else's storms, minimizing your own needs, or believing love required you to shrink, then your nervous system learned to recognize danger as home. Picture an ancient tree growing around a fence until the metal becomes part of its trunk. The fence might rust and crumble, but the tree maintains its twisted shape, forever holding space for something that no longer exists. This is repetition compulsion, your psyche's way of staying prepared for threats that have already passed, maintaining defenses against ghosts that no longer walk your halls. The seductive ones, the withholding ones, the ones who needed saving, the ones who couldn't see you, they weren't random selections. They were casting calls answered by the part of you that learned love through a very specific frequency. Your attachment system, formed in those crucial early years, became a tuning fork that vibrates only to particular notes of dysfunction. Consider how a child learns to read the weather of their household. The slight shift in a parent's tone that signals a storm approaching, the particular quality of silence that means safety, the specific dance required to earn a moment of warmth. These early meteorological studies don't disappear when we grow up. They become the invisible curriculum we use to navigate every intimate landscape for the rest of our lives. You learn to be a scholar of other people's needs, a translator of unspoken demands, a shapeshifter who could become whatever was required to maintain connection. This hypervigilance felt like love because in your earliest world, it was the price of attachment. Now, decades later, you find yourself drawn to people who require the same exhausting performance, the same constant calibration, the same surrender of self. Someone once dreamed they were in a house with countless rooms, each door opening to the same scene. Themselves as a child, waiting. No matter which door they chose, which hallway they took, they ended up in that same moment of suspended need. The child wasn't waiting for someone specific. They were waiting to be seen, to be chosen, to be told they were enough just as they were. Upon waking, they realized they'd been living this dream with their eyes open, creating endless variations of the same emotional architecture in every relationship, every job, every major decision. This dream isn't about the past haunting you. It's about how the waiting child inside you is still furnishing every room of your adult life, still preparing spaces for people who will keep them waiting, still confusing familiarity with safety. The trauma bond speaks in paradoxes. I choose what hurts because hurt is what I know. I fear abandonment, so I choose those who abandon. I crave safety, so I recreate danger. This isn't madness, it's the terrible logic of a survival system that learned to navigate love through a minefield and now sees mines where there are meadows, predators where there are partners. Your pattern recognition software is exquisite. Within seconds of meeting someone, your unconscious has already run 1,000 calculations. Do they fit my wound? Will they play the role I need them to play? Can they help me complete the story I've been trying to finish since I was 7? The chemistry you feel might actually be recognition. Not of a soulmate, but of a scene partner who knows their lines in your ancient play. The pull towards certain people feels like destiny because it is, just not the kind of destiny we imagine. It's the destiny of unfinished business, of stories seeking their conclusion, of wounds looking for their original source. When someone feels inexplicably familiar, when the connection seems to transcend time and space, when you feel you've known them forever, you have. They're wearing the mask of someone your child self has been negotiating with for decades. This recognition happens below the threshold of consciousness. Your body knows before your mind does. The slight quickening of pulse, the subtle tightening in your chest, the imperceptible shift in your breathing, these are your early warning systems detecting a familiar frequency. But trauma inverts our warning systems. What should signal danger instead signals home. What should inspire caution instead ignites attraction. Think of how a moth is drawn to flame, not because it seeks destruction, but because its navigation system evolved to use the moon as a fixed point. Artificial lights confuse this ancient programming, sending the moth spiraling toward its doom. Your attachment system, evolved to seek proximity and care, becomes similarly confused when early caregivers mixed love with harm, presence with absence, safety with threat. The repetition compulsion isn't just about relationships, it's an organizing principle that touches every corner of your existence. The jobs where you're undervalued echo early experiences of having to earn basic recognition. The friendships where you give more than you receive mirror the emotional economics of your first relationships. The creative projects you abandon just before completion repeat the pattern of being unseen at crucial moments of vulnerability. Each repetition is an attempt at mastery. The psyche believes that if it can just recreate the original scenario perfectly enough, it can finally get a different outcome. This time your love will be enough to heal them. This time your performance will be perfect enough to earn consistent presence. This time you'll be so good, so needed, so essential that abandonment becomes impossible. But the game is rigged. You're trying to win a contest that ended decades ago, competing for a prize that was never available, performing for an audience that has long since left the theater. The other players in your current life, lovers, friends, bosses, are often just wearing costumes you've unconsciously provided, reading from scripts they don't know they've been handed. The truly insidious part is how these patterns feel like choices. You experience agency in selecting partners, in staying or leaving, in trying harder or giving up. But choice requires consciousness, and these selections happen in the twilight realm, where past and present blur, where the child's logic still governs adult decisions, where what feels like intuition might actually be conditioning. Your attractions aren't preferences, they're prophecies. When someone feels right in that deep, instant way, it might be because they fit perfectly into the wound you've been carrying. When someone feels wrong, too available, too consistent, too kind, it might be because they don't match the template your nervous system uses to recognize love. The secure ones, the ones who show up consistently, who say what they mean and mean what they say, they often feel boring because they're speaking a language your attachment system never learned. It's like being offered a feast when you've only ever known hunger, being given a map when you've only ever navigated by crisis, being loved in a way that doesn't require you to perform, prove, or perfect yourself into worthiness. This is why healing isn't about finding better people. It's about becoming someone who can recognize and receive better love. It's about updating your internal software so that safety stops feeling like death and consistency stops feeling like abandonment. It's about grieving the childhood where love came with conditions so you can stop recreating those conditions in your adult life. The process requires a particular kind of courage, not the courage to face external dangers, but the courage to disappoint your internal programmers. Every time you choose differently, some part of you will scream that you're betraying everything you've ever known about survival. Your body will revolt against safety. Your mind will manufacture emergencies. Your heart will insist that the calm ones can't possibly love you the way the chaotic ones do. These protests are not signs you're doing something wrong. They're signs you're doing something different. The familiar dysfunction has been your North Star for so long that choosing health feels like choosing death. The part of you that learned to survive through hypervigilance experiences peace as danger. The part that learned love through earning experiences unconditional acceptance as rejection. True transformation doesn't come from finding better people to play the same roles. It comes from changing the play itself. This means disappointing the parts of you that are still trying to perfect the original performance. It means accepting that no amount of present-day heroics will change past tense outcomes. It means grieving not just what happened, but all the ways you've kept it happening. The work isn't to stop choosing pain. It's to recognize that what you've been choosing isn't pain, but a misunderstood form of loyalty. Every toxic relationship has been an attempt to finally get it right, to rewrite the ending, to prove that this time, your love will be enough to change the story. Every failed boundary has been an act of hope. Every return to what hurts has been a pilgrimage to the original wound. This loyalty runs deeper than logic, older than language, more persistent than any conscious intention. It's the loyalty of a child who needed to believe their parents' limitations were their own fault because the alternative, accepting that the people who were supposed to protect them couldn't or wouldn't, was too devastating to survive. It's easier for a child to believe they're bad than to accept their world is unsafe. But you're not a child anymore. The devastating truth you couldn't afford to know then is the liberating truth that can free you now. It wasn't your fault. You couldn't have loved them better, been better, done better in any way that would have changed the fundamental equation. The lack was never in you. 3 rituals of recognition can begin to shift these ancient patterns. First, witness your patterns without judgment, like an anthropologist studying a fascinating culture. Notice how you recreate familiar dynamics, how you unconsciously coach others to play familiar roles, how you interpret neutral behaviors through the lens of old expectations. This witnessing itself is revolutionary. Patterns thrive in darkness and begin to lose their power when brought into conscious awareness. Second, dialogue with the part of you that chooses the familiar hurt. Ask it what it's trying to protect, what it believes will happen if you choose differently. Often you'll find a young part that believes choosing differently means abandoning hope that the original wound can be healed. Thank this part for its dedication, its loyalty, its tireless efforts to complete an impossible mission. Let it know the war is over. Third, practice small betrayals of your conditioning. Choose the person who feels too safe. Stay in the conversation that feels too easy. Accept the love that feels too simple. These small acts of rebellion against your programming will feel uncomfortable, even wrong. Your body might protest with anxiety. Your mind might manufacture reasons to run. This discomfort is not a signal to stop. It's evidence that you're finally choosing outside your pattern. The practice requires immense compassion for yourself. Every time you notice yourself recreating the pattern, resist the urge to shame yourself. Shame is often part of the pattern itself. another way to recreate the familiar experience of not being good enough. Instead, celebrate the noticing. Awareness is the first victory. Remember that changing patterns isn't about perfection. You'll slip back into old dynamics, choose familiar dysfunction, find yourself in that same emotional room you swore you'd never enter again. This isn't failure, it's the spiral nature of healing. Each time you revisit the pattern, you do so with slightly more consciousness, slightly more choice, slightly more ability to choose differently next time. The most profound rebellions happen in the quietest moments. When you choose presence over performance. When you let someone see you without your armor. When you realize that breaking patterns isn't about force, it's about tenderness toward the part of you that has been standing guard for so long. When you accept that you can't save anyone who doesn't want to be saved, can't earn love that requires you to disappear, can't perform your way into unconditional acceptance. As you practice choosing differently, you might notice a strange grief arising. This is the grief for all the years spent in repetition, all the energy poured into impossible missions, all the love wasted on people who couldn't receive it. But there's another grief too, the grief of letting go of the hope that this time will be different. The hope itself has been a kind of companion, a driving force, a reason to keep trying. Letting it go can feel like losing a part of yourself, but what feels like loss is actually recovery. You're not losing yourself. You're finding the self that got buried under all that performing, proving, and perfecting. You're not giving up on love. You're giving up on the specific kind of love that requires you to abandon yourself. You're not betraying your past. You're finally honoring the child you were by refusing to continue their suffering. The patterns want you to believe that without them, you'll be alone. That no one will choose you if you're not useful, needed, essential to their survival or healing. That love requires you to be extraordinary, exceptional, endlessly giving. These are the lies that keep the patterns alive. The truth is much simpler and more revolutionary. You can be loved without performing. You can be chosen without shrinking. You can be held without having to hold everything together. You can be human, flawed, sometimes difficult, occasionally needy, and still be worthy of consistent, patient, present love. But first, you have to believe such love exists. This is perhaps the hardest part of breaking patterns, accepting that what you've been settling for isn't all there is. That there are people who can love without consuming, hold without smothering, stay without demanding you earn their presence daily. That there are relationships where both people's needs matter, where conflict doesn't mean catastrophe, where love is a steady presence rather than a reward for good behavior. May you find the courage to disappoint your ghosts. May you discover that safety doesn't require vigilance, that love doesn't demand you become smaller, that choosing differently isn't betrayal but liberation. May the patterns that once protected you bow gracefully as you walk past them into a future they were never meant to navigate. May you learn to recognize real love by how it expands rather than diminishes you, by how it sees rather than needs you, by how it stays present even when you're not performing. May you discover that the opposite of repetition isn't perfection, it's presence. The opposite of pattern isn't chaos, it's choice. In the end, you'll realize the chains were always invisible because they were made of loyalty, not metal. And what is forged from love, even misguided love, can be transformed by love. The key was always in your hand. You were just holding it for someone who was never coming back to claim it. The deepest healing happens when you finally use that key for yourself, when you unlock the door not to escape your history, but to finally be present in your life. When you realize that the love you've been seeking in others has been waiting within you all along, patient, persistent, and ready to welcome you home.